What if I told you that a century ago, ordinary young women, teenagers, factory girls, daughters of miners, seamstresses, and housewives, walked through the streets of America glowing like fallen stars in the night? Their skin shimmered, their dresses sparkled, their hair glowed with a ghostly green fire, making strangers stop and stare. They were called the Shining Girls, the Ghost Girls, the girls who glowed in the dark. But what no one knew, not the people watching them in awe, not their families, not even the girls themselves, was that they weren't glowing because they were blessed. They were glowing because they were dying. Welcome back to Pioneers in the Dark. Before we begin this haunting journey, hit that subscribe button right now, because tonight we're stepping into one of history's most shocking, hidden tragedies. And trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. Imagine the year is 1917. The world is at war. Factories roar through the night, and America is rushing to produce equipment for soldiers fighting across the ocean. Among the most essential tools are wristwatches and instrument dials painted with a new, miraculous invention: luminous paint that glows bright green even in total darkness. The paint has a magical name, Undark, and the workers who apply it are young women barely out of childhood. They sit in rows at wooden tables inside the United States Radium Corporation studio, laughing, gossiping, clicking their heels against the floor, unaware that every brushstroke is sealing their fate. They haven't been hired for their strength or experience. They've been hired for their delicate hands, for their precision, for their beauty. Teenage girls with steady fingers who can paint numbers smaller than grains of rice, making them glow like little constellations waiting to be assembled. Their supervisors tell them to shape the paintbrushes with their lips. Lip pointing, they call it. A quick dip of the brush into water, a roll across the tongue, then into the paint. Again and again, hundreds of times a day. The girls joke about it. Some paint their nails with Undark. Some brush it across their teeth to make them shine like pearls in the dark. They twirl in the mirror, enchanted by the glittering dust on their skin, unaware that every sparkle is a tiny piece of death. Because the miraculous glowing ingredient inside Undark is radium, a radioactive element 1,000,000 times more dangerous than anyone understood. Marie Curie, the woman who discovered radium, slept with it by her bedside, thinking it was harmless. She didn't know it would eventually destroy her too. And if the greatest scientist of her time didn't know the danger, how could these young girls? In the factory, the foreman insists the paint is perfectly safe, safe enough to eat. They laugh. The chemists, the executives, the male radium workers in the back laboratories are forbidden from touching the powder with bare hands. They use gloves, tongs, masks. But the girls, no gloves, no masks, no warnings. Just brushes. Lips, radium. The glowing substance settles into their hair, their dresses, their fingernails. They walk home shimmering like angels, leaving faint trails of light behind them. Mothers admire their daughters' radiance, unaware that the glow is soaking into their bones. Fathers proudly say their girls are doing patriotic work, painting the tools that will help soldiers survive in the trenches. And for a while, everything looks perfect. The girls earn more money than most young women have ever seen. 10 times the salary of factory sewing or laundry work, enough to buy silk stockings, makeup, fancy shoes. They dine in restaurants for the first time. They ride streetcars with confidence. They become symbols of independence, of the modern woman. The glowing girls, America's daughters, shining with pride. But beneath that glow, something terrible is beginning. A toothache here, a sore ankle there, a strange bruise that never heals, gums that bleed at the slightest touch. Doctors dismiss it as women's hysteria. Poor hygiene, anemia. Some say the girls are imagining things. Others say the symptoms are caused by syphilis. A lie planted by the very company that poisoned them, designed to shame them into silence. But the suffering spreads. Ada starts losing teeth. Molly's jaw begins to ache so severely she can't chew. Grace feels a deep, gnawing pain in her back. like her spine is dissolving. And the most horrifying part is that the girls continue to glow. Softly, faintly, because the radium inside them has become part of their bones. They no longer need undark. They themselves are undark. At night, when they lie in bed, their bodies emit a dim, eerie light, as though their souls are burning out through their skin. The first death comes quietly. Molly McGee, once the brightest girl in the studio, full of laughter, wastes away in agony. Doctors pull her teeth, but instead of healing, her gums dissolve. Her jawbone crumbles like chalk in their hands. Sores burst across her face. Tumors blossom inside her body. And still no one believes the truth. Not the doctors, not the company, not the world. Radium is harmless, they insist. Radium is life-giving. Radium is magic. Until the day an undertaker notices something impossible. Molly's coffin is glowing. And suddenly the question becomes unavoidable. Not what happened, but how many more? Because dozens of girls, then hundreds, are showing the same symptoms. Their bones breaking, their teeth falling out, their bodies collapsing from the inside. Yet the company keeps hiring more, keeps lying, keeps silencing anyone who dares to question the truth. The glowing girls continue to paint, to laugh, to dream, unaware that they are living on borrowed time. And as the deaths begin to mount, as families begin to mourn, as the truth starts to claw its way into the light, a single young woman, Grace Fryer, will decide she has had enough. But before she can stand up and fight, before she can take on the most powerful scientific corporation in America, before she can become the voice of the dying, she must face the horrifying reality. She is already dying too. And yet, she chooses to fight anyway. Because someone has to. Someone has to hold the world accountable. Someone has to speak for the women who glowed in the dark. And in this battle between truth and greed, between science and corporate power, between young women and a multi-million-dollar empire, the lies did not end when the first women collapsed, nor when their teeth began falling out, nor when their bones started to dissolve from the inside. In fact, as the Radium Girls suffered in ways the world had never seen, the company tightened its grip on silence, protecting profits while the women themselves faded like dying stars, glowing faintly in the dark even as their lives dimmed. As 1923 turned to 1924, whispers of sickness spread through the New Jersey plant, but management insisted everything was normal. And the doctors hired by the company repeated the same rehearsed lines. "It's anemia," they said, "or you're stressed, or it's your imagination." They called the girls clumsy, careless, hysterical, the same words used for women who dared complain about anything. The women, still trusting, still hopeful, believed for a time. They wanted to believe. After all, this job had been a miracle. Good pay, independence, respectability. They were proud of their work. They were painting time itself onto dials and instruments that guided soldiers and explorers. They did not want the job to be killing them. But behind the closed doors of management offices, something sinister brewed. Internal reports began showing that men in the radium labs, male employees who handled larger quantities, had been instructed to work behind protective barriers with special ventilation, with lead aprons and masks. Only the women were told radium was harmless. Only the women were taught lip pointing. Only the women were left exposed because they were considered replaceable. And as the symptoms intensified, aching joints, swollen jaws, tooth pain that could drop a grown man to his knees, the company quietly dismissed the sickest girls, removing them like defective parts from an assembly line. No severance, no apology. No warning to the others, still dipping brushes into radioactive poison. They were abandoned. But truth has a habit of clawing its way to the surface, even when buried under greed. One of the first dominoes to fall was the case of Molly McGee. Once one of the liveliest girls in the studio, Molly soon found herself in a nightmare her doctors could not explain. It began innocently enough, a toothache. The dentist pulled the tooth, expecting relief, but instead the socket refused to heal, oozing dark, foul-smelling pus. Soon another tooth fell out, then another. Her jawbone softened until it could be removed with fingers alone, crumbling like chalk. Her hip disintegrated. Her bones, once strong and full of life, became hollow. Brittle structures light as ash, barely able to support the weight of her body. Molly did not know she was dying of radiation poisoning. No one did. Because the diagnosis itself was being covered up. The company paid doctors to avoid mentioning radium. Death certificates were edited, falsified, manipulated. Syphilis, they wrote, as if that were easier to believe than a substance so magical it glowed in the dark could actually be a killer. It was a tactic designed to shame the women, dismiss them, silence their families. But Molly's death, brutal, swift, horrifying, lit the spark of suspicion. Across town, 5 other women, later known as the Radium Girls, were watching their own health collapse. Grace Fryer, perhaps the most determined among them, had once cherished her job at the plant. But now her teeth were loosening, her spine was collapsing, and she struggled to walk upright. She visited doctor after doctor, desperate for answers, but every diagnosis contradicted the last. Some doctors seemed afraid to speak freely. Others seemed strangely uninterested. But Grace, unlike the company, kept records. She tracked her symptoms, her visits, the strange silence surrounding radium. Meanwhile, the public still adored radium as a miracle cure. Sold in health tonics, beauty creams, even radium-infused water. Magazines celebrated it. Advertisements worshipped it. Radiant health, eternal youth, energy from within. The world was in love with a poison it didn't understand. And so the women's suffering existed in a fog of disbelief. Yet, as the bodies piled up, as jaws rotted, as spines collapsed, as tumors grew like wildfire, the truth grew harder to conceal. Doctors began whispering theories. Journalists began investigating. And then came Dr. Harrison Martland, the medical examiner of Essex County, the first man brave enough to say the forbidden word out loud: radium. He studied the bones of the dead women and found that their remains still glowed faintly in the dark, like ghostly lanterns. The radium they had ingested had become part of them. It fused with their bones, their blood, their marrow, forever radiating death. Martland discovered that radium did not leave the body. It stayed, poisoning, burning, decaying, until there was nothing left to save. With undeniable evidence, he connected the dots the company pretended not to see. But knowing the truth was only the beginning, because proving it in court was another matter entirely. When Grace Fryer decided to sue the United States Radium Corporation, she had no idea she was stepping into a battle far bigger than herself. For 2 years, she searched for an attorney willing to take her case, but no one dared challenge the powerful corporation. Some lawyers were intimidated. Others were bribed. Others insisted the case was hopeless. By the time Grace finally secured representation, her spine was so damaged she could no longer sit comfortably in a chair. Her hands trembled. Her teeth were gone. She was dying, and the company knew it. Their strategy was cruelly simple: delay until the women were dead. They stalled lawsuits, postponed hearings, filed motions, requested extensions, anything to run out the clock. The Radium Girls, barely able to stand, were forced to attend depositions and hearings as their strength faded. And yet, they kept fighting. They fought because they had been lied to. They fought because their friends had died in agony. They fought because no one else would. Meanwhile, the public began to take notice. Newspapers picked up the story, horrified by the gruesome details. Photographs of skeletal women being carried into courtrooms spread across the country. Americans who once celebrated radium now questioned the industry behind it. The company, desperate to save face, launched a propaganda campaign claiming the girls were sick due to poor hygiene or unrelated illnesses. They insisted radium was safe. They hired experts to refute the science. They denied, even as their own internal documents proved they had known for years the dangers of radium exposure. The truth was not a mystery to them. It was an inconvenience. The courtroom became a battleground where science, justice, and humanity clashed. The women, too weak to stand, delivered testimony from their hospital beds. Judges wept. Reporters documented every detail. And slowly, the tide began to turn. Evidence of corporate negligence mounted. Letters, memos, medical reports all pointed to a cover-up of monstrous proportions. Grace Fryer and her fellow plaintiffs, Edna, Catherine, Quinta, and Albina, became symbols of courage. Their suffering was undeniable, their voices unwavering, even as their bodies failed them. They were dying, but they were heard. Yet even as momentum built, the company continued its delaying tactics, hoping they could outlast the women whose lives they had stolen. Every day was a race against time. Every night, more women succumbed. Their glowing bones, detected even in death, became haunting reminders of the cost of greed. The Radium Girls walked into history not as victims, but as warriors. Their determination carving the path forward for workplace safety laws that had never existed before. But before justice came, before the world finally acknowledged the truth the women endured. Unimaginable suffering, and Part 3 will take you into the final phase of their fight, their legacy, and how their deaths changed the world forever. They were dying, every one of them, but they refused to go quietly. The Radium Girls, those glowing ghosts of the industrial age, dragged themselves through the final chapter of their battle with a determination that seemed almost supernatural, as if the light inside their bones refused to extinguish until justice was served. By 1928, the women had become national symbols. Their frail bodies splashed across newspapers, their once bright eyes now sunken. Americans read with horror about women whose jawbones disintegrated, whose spines collapsed, whose breath rattled with every word. Their lawsuits, delayed and manipulated for years, were finally forcing their way into the spotlight. The public pressure had become too heavy for the United States Radium Corporation to ignore. The company, once smug, confident, and protected by wealth, found itself trapped, cornered by truth. Executives who once claimed radium was harmless now avoided reporters, slipping out of back doors like fugitives. Their lies had rotted, just as surely as the radium had rotted the bones of the women they had poisoned. When the settlement came, it was not victory. It was a compromise carved out of desperation. Grace Fryer and her dying coworkers were awarded compensation, an amount that today wouldn't even cover a single hospital stay. They received a small pension, though none were expected to live long enough to collect much of it. They received coverage for medical bills, though medicine could no longer save them. And they received something far more valuable: recognition. The truth was out. The world now knew that these women were not delusional, not irresponsible, not victims of hysteria or the shameful diagnoses intentionally planted on their medical records. They had been poisoned, systematically, knowingly. Their deaths were the direct result of corporate greed disguised as scientific progress. Even in their settlement, the Radium Girls had to sacrifice. They agreed not to pursue further legal action, not because they wanted to forgive, but because their bodies were simply giving out. They had no time left, but their case cracked open the door to something bigger: a national reckoning. The ripple effects spread quickly. Across the country, factories that had once carelessly handled radium were suddenly thrust under scrutiny. Workers who had once believed their symptoms were coincidences now realized they had been casualties of the same toxic secrets. New regulations were drafted. Workplace safety laws were strengthened. Companies were forced, often for the first time, to take responsibility for the lives of their workers. And yet, even as progress was made, the women who had inspired it were fading away. One by one, the Radium Girls passed, their deaths heartbreaking but no longer invisible. Their bones, buried in quiet cemeteries, still emitted faint radiation for decades, permanent. Ghostly reminders of what had been done to them. But the story didn't end in the 1920s. In the 1930s, another group of dial painters, this time in Illinois, began falling sick. Their symptoms mirrored those in New Jersey: aching joints, loose teeth, unbearable fatigue. But unlike the first group, these women had something powerful on their side. Precedent, evidence, history, and the legacy of the Radium Girls became their shield. This second wave of victims filed lawsuits more quickly and more confidently. When their case reached court, the judge ruled in their favor in a landmark decision that slammed the door on corporate denial forever. The ruling forced radium companies to recognize radiation poisoning as an occupational hazard and to offer protection, not lies. Safety protocols were redesigned. The lip-pointing technique was banned nationwide. Radium watches stopped being painted by hand, and the government finally stepped in, establishing safety standards that would influence nuclear policy, radiation research, and worker safety for generations. The Radium Girls had changed the world at a cost no one should ever have had to pay. But the deepest legacy was not legal, it was moral. Their story forced society to confront a brutal truth: progress without ethics is not progress at all. Their suffering exposed the dark underbelly of early industrial America, showing how profit could blind entire corporations to human life. It revealed the vulnerabilities of young women who sought independence but were exploited because of it. And it challenged the era's belief that women were disposable, unimportant, easily brushed aside. These women, many no older than teenagers, showed a strength the world didn't expect. They fought when no one believed them. They spoke when society told them to stay silent. They stood against corporations with more money than they could ever imagine. They became warriors without ever choosing the battlefield. By the 1950s and 60s, as awareness about radiation grew globally, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, nuclear tests, the world began to understand what the Radium Girls had endured. Scientists referenced their cases when studying radiation poisoning. Their medical records became essential to understanding long-term radiation exposure. They had become, tragically, the foundation of modern radiation safety. Their autopsies, once horrifying, now served as warnings that saved thousands of future lives. Their ghosts lived on in every regulation, every radiation suit, every warning label on radioactive material. Their suffering ensured no one would ever again be allowed to treat radioactive substances with the reckless enthusiasm of the early 20th century. And yet, for decades, their story was forgotten, buried under scientific achievements and corporate narratives. It wasn't until historians, journalists, and filmmakers resurrected their tale that the Radium Girls finally received the recognition they deserved. Today, their story is taught in schools. Books immortalize them. Documentaries illuminate their bravery. Their graves, some still faintly radioactive, have become memorials, not of tragedy, but of resistance. Their glow, once a symbol of innocence and ignorance, has become a symbol of truth. A reminder that even the smallest voices can shake empires. A reminder that the cost of silence is always paid by the innocent. A reminder that justice, even when delayed, has the power to outlive the bodies of those who fought for it. And as you hear their story now, nearly a century later, you realize something profound. Their fight is not a relic of the past. Corporations still hide dangers. Workers still suffer in silence. People still die because someone valued profit over humanity. The Radium Girls are a warning from history, their glowing bones whispering through time. Never stop asking questions. Never trust blindly. And never let the powerful diminish your truth. Their legacy is a torch passed down through generations, urging us to protect the vulnerable, challenge injustice, and demand accountability from those who claim authority. If their story moved you, if it lit even a small spark of anger or admiration, then don't let it fade. Keep their fight alive. Share their legacy. And make sure the world never forgets the women who glowed in the dark, not because they wanted to, but because they were sacrificed for the sake of profit and progress. And if you want more stories of hidden heroes, forgotten fighters, and the people who changed history at unimaginable cost, then make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who still believes one voice can't make a difference. Because these women proved that one voice can echo for 100 years.